how sound Fannie and Freddie were. The same day, I was on another channel saying they were bankrupt and they were going to have to get bailed out by the government. Of course, I was opposed to the government bailout. I wanted to let Fannie and Freddie go under without a bailout. But so it seemed like it was an ideal matchup. And I thought about it. It wasn't something that initially I wanted to do. I'm fine, as a private citizen. I have a good business. I have a growing business. And unfortunately, my business looks very good because the worse they make the economy, the more mistakes that Washington makes, the more they screw up our economy, the more they destroy our currency, the better my business does, because people come to me to protect themselves. So I have, unfortunately, my business is just going to boom for the next decade or so. But as an American citizen, I can certainly find ways to profit from all the foolish things that are being done in Washington. But rather than simply doing that, it seems to me it would be a much better use of my time if I can go to Washington and prevent them from making those mistakes in the first place. And that's why I'm running. I don't think there's anybody in the Senate today that really understands these problems, that understands the nature of these problems, how we got into this mess, or what needs to be done. The popular mantra in Washington is that the free market failed, that there wasn't enough regulation, and all we need is more government and more regulation, and we can solve these problems. And what Washington doesn't understand is they caused the problems. These are problems that a free market would have prevented from happening. The only reason that there was a housing bubble was because the government inflated it. They supplied the cheap credit from the Federal Reserve, and they wrote the rules that distorted. They created all the moral hazards in the housing market and in other areas. And if it wasn't for government, this wouldn't have happened. And unfortunately, Ben Bernanke and President Obama learned nothing from what happened under Bush and Greenspan. They are repeating all of those mistakes, only on a grander scale. Instead of having interest rates at 1%, they're at 0%. Instead of having $300 or $400 billion deficits, the deficits are $200, $2 trillion. It's the same thing. It's the same stimulus. But what Washington doesn't understand is that the reason the economy is sick is because of the stimulus. The stimulus is the toxin. That the only cure is to let the free market function. In the short run, there's some pain, but there's a lot of benefits if we suck it up and endure that pain, because it's not going to last very long, and then the economy is going to recover, we're going to have lasting prosperity. But the politicians don't want that. All they want to do is pretend that they have some miracle cure, and all they care about is, can we do something to artificially stimulate the economy so we can get reelected one more time? But every time they do that, they lay the foundation for a bigger economic crisis. And the crisis that's coming, and whether it's, I don't know if it's going to start in 2010 or 2011, but it's coming soon. It's going to be much worse than what we experienced in 2008. Because it's not just going to be a financial crisis. It's going to be a currency crisis. Because of all the money that they're printing to artificially stimulate the economy, to keep us buying houses we can't afford, buying cars we can't afford, to keep this whole phony consumer spending economy going, they're creating all this money. It's going to collapse the dollar. And when we have that currency crisis and the dollar plunges, it's going to make interest rates go through the roof, it's going to make consumer prices go through the roof, and then when people are unemployed, it's going to be a lot worse than it is now, because those unemployment checks aren't going to buy very much. And unfortunately, by 2011 or 2012, there will be millions more unemployed people than there are today, because everything the government is doing is destroying employment opportunities. They're trying to artificially prop up this phony economy, but in the process, they're taking all the resources away from the private sector that we need to create the real jobs and the real economy that we need. The government doesn't have any resources, so if they're going to divert resources away from the private sector, they don't have them. Right now, they're undermining our savings with inflation and high taxes. They're undermining capital formation. They don't understand. Washington just had a committee to try to figure out how to create jobs. Right? The problem is none of these guys have ever created jobs. They don't understand where they come from. They don't come from government. They come from the private sector. They come from profits and they come from capital. But everything that they're doing is diminishing profits and undermining capital, so there's no way that we can create jobs. They're diverting whatever credit businesses would need to make the investments. That's being diverted to government. It's being diverted for consumer spending. So what I want to do is try to go to Washington and change this. I want to try to educate the other 99 senators, Congress, the president, if they'll listen to me, to understand all the things that they've done wrong and why we have to do the exact opposite of what we've been doing all these years if we ever want to have real change in this country. And I know there have been people who have run in the Republican Party in the past that stand up and they pretend to believe in the principles of limited government, and they talk about tax cuts and shrinking government and getting government out of the way and sound money and the Constitution, but they never live up to it. You know, you elect them and you think they're Republican, and then they govern like a Democrat. All they do is vote to increase government. The minute they become part of government, they want to grow it. They want to expand it. They get to Washington, they like it there, they want to stay there, they want to get reelected, and so they play the game. That's not why I'm going. You know, I'm not a politician. I've never run for office. I've never held office. I'm a private citizen, and I'm fed up with what they've been doing. And I'm willing to take time out of my life and spend 6 years in Washington, D.C. to see if there's something that I can do to straighten this out. Because I know that career politicians will never solve the problems. They don't understand them, and all they can think about is their own reelection. To them, that's the problem. How do I get reelected? That's not going to be my problem. My only concern is going to be getting the government out of the way. Restoring capitalism, restoring free markets, respecting the Constitution, you know, stopping all the spending out of Washington, and getting sound money out of the Federal Reserve. Until we get those things, all we're going to do is drive this economy into a deeper, deeper recession. And I'm afraid that during this next 6 years, if something doesn't change, we're going to go through an inflationary depression that's going to be worse than the 1930s, and certainly going to be worse than the 1970s. And the government is clueless with what to do. And the real threats to our liberties is every time the government creates these problems, the solution is always more government. And every time we get more government, we surrender liberties, we surrender constitutional rights. And the bigger the government gets, you know, the worse the economy gets, and then it's a self-perpetuating spiral. So we have to stop it, and we have to stop it now. Anyway, I know I'm running long on my time, so if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have two. First, I appreciate your comments about, you know, how we got to where we are with the economy. But given that you're elected at the end of 3 years, what practical things would you have implemented if you had your way in Washington?
If I'm elected now, or if I had been elected?
No, if you're elected.
Yeah, well, the first thing we have to do is understand the free market. So the government has to get out of the economy. If a company is failing, like GMAC is about to get its third government bailout, the market is basically saying that this company is doing something wrong. So stop it, right? You know, when you're generating a profit, that's the market saying that what you're doing makes sense economically. So keep doing it. When you're generating a loss, that's the market's way of saying, cut it out, stop it. And so the market is going to allocate resources properly, because companies that are profitable will grow, and companies that are losing money will go out of business, and their resources will be freed up to go someplace else. We can't bail out GMAC. Let them fail. We shouldn't have bailed out Chrysler or General Motors. We had to let them fail. We shouldn't have bailed out the investment banks. We need to let them fail. The country would have been much better off had we done that. Instead, we are diverting all these resources to bailing out companies that are destroying wealth. And where are the resources coming from? They're coming from other companies that would have created wealth. And so the first thing we have to do is stay out of the economy with bailing out. Then the next thing we have to do is stop spending money. I mean, they just raised the debt ceiling up to $12 trillion, and they're going to raise it again to 14 in a couple of months. We got to stop that. We can't raise that. It's like an ever-increasing ceiling. If it's a ceiling, let's make it a real ceiling, a hard ceiling that we can't raise, and let's start cutting government spending. We have to take a meat hook to government spending. Government is huge. There are a lot of departments that we can eliminate. We've got to attack entitlements. The government is, we don't have this money. And the cost of government, a lot of people tell you that we want to cut taxes. That's disingenuous. You can't cut taxes and not cut spending. Because if you cut taxes and keep spending, then all you're doing is committing Americans to pay higher taxes in the future or higher inflation right now. But either way, it's worse. So we got to cut government spending, number two. And if we can cut spending enough, then we can cut taxes. And the taxes I'd like to cut are the income taxes or the payroll tax. Those are the taxes I want to, that are the most destructive to the economy. And then the third thing is deregulation. I mean, the problem is there's so much government regulation. I mean, look at my industry. I'm dying with regulation in the securities industry. There's so much regulation in my business right now. I think I got 5 or 6 people who work full-time for me, and all they do is comply with worthless and unnecessary government regulation. That's all they do. And I started my business as a one-man company. I know for a fact that if the regulations that exist today existed 10 years ago, I never could have got this company started. It would have been impossible.